Well, hello and welcome to another Lanzarote information video. I'm Mike from Lanzarote Information. Now, last week I did a video on the history of Puerto del Carmen, and a lot of people have asked me via comments and also by emailing me if I would cover the other resorts, and your wish is my command. So today we are covering Costa Teguise, and yes, for sure we will be doing Playa Blanca in the very near future as well. So stay tuned. If you haven't seen the Puerto del Carmen one and you want to, just go visit our channel down below and you'll see it as one of the recent videos. So let's talk about Costa Teguise, and I always think of that resort as having had three phases in its life. Initially, it was a 5-star upmarket resort. And yes, you did hear that right. It was a 5-star upmarket resort. Then it went through a period where it was predominantly a timeshare resort. And finally, we reached the phase that we're in today, which is the Costa Teguise is a kind of everyman resort, very much in the same way that Puerto del Carmen is. It has accommodation that suits everyone, from very cheap and cheerful apartments to expensive 5-star hotels and everything that you would expect in between. But this story is a really interesting one, as you'll find out when I explain why the resort moved from one phase to the next and what happened with it. And by the way, did you know that César Manrique was very heavily involved in the design and construction of the resort of Costa Teguise? So let's wind the clock back now to the mid-1970s. And by this time, the resort of Puerto del Carmen was really up and running quite well. They had the Farallones Hotel at one end, the San Antonio at the other end, and there was lots of construction going on in the middle, in the area that we now call the Strip. And there were apartment complexes going up there, lots of nice villas towards the back of the resort. The beaches were looking beautiful, and it was all working very, very well. Now, inevitably, the ayuntamientos, the town halls in the other 6 municipalities of the island were sort of looking at this sideways, thinking, well, this is good. We'd like to try and find a way to get a little bit of this tourist action. And the first of those to make a move was the ayuntamiento of Teguise. Now, they looked at Famara, which is in the municipality, as a possible tourist area. The issue at Famara is that the sea can be quite rough there, which is why it's very good for surfing. There can be a bit of an undertow. So whilst that Famara beach is just a beautiful beach, it probably isn't ideal for people to sort of laze around on and go swimming from. So the town hall looked across to the other coast, to the area that we now know as Costa Teguise, but it didn't have that name at that time. And they identified two pretty nice bays, which we know today as Bastian and Las Cucharas, with Playa Jablillo in the middle, and realized that this would be the kind of perfect area to put a resort. Now, they consulted with one of the island's favourite sons, César Manrique, who of course was living back in Lanzarote after his spell in New York. And between Manrique, the mayor, and the rest of the committee on the town hall, they decided that they were going to do things a little bit differently to Puerto del Carmen. What they decided they wanted to do was to create a 5-star upmarket resort. So what they had at that point was an ambitious plan, but they didn't have the money to enact it because the cost of building a 5-star resort and creating beaches on the rocky coast there was going to be absolutely massive. And what they decided to do was to bring in some private finance. And that came from Rio Tinto PLC, who are a massive Spanish company with interests in all kinds of things, but they actually made their fortune, if that makes sense, out of manufacturing explosives. So the town hall gifted 12 million square meters of land in the area that we now know as Costa Teguise in return for their investment, which was to create their vision, their joint vision with César Manrique for the new resort of Costa Teguise. So let's talk about that original vision. And the plan was to, as I said before, create a very much upmarket resort. And the centerpiece of the resort was the area we now know as Pueblo Marinero. So that's the square right in the middle of Costa Teguise. And that was completely designed by Manrique. And his aim was to create the feel of a Spanish fishing village. And actually, if you walk through the sort of side streets leading into the square, you'll see it very much has that feel, with the kind of narrow streets, with shops and bars downstairs, apartments upstairs, and it really worked. It was a very successful implementation of the original vision. Now, the second part of that vision was to create a five-star hotel, Lanzarote's first and for a long time only five-star hotel, and that was the Meliá Salinas. As you stand on the beach in Costa Teguise looking inland, that's over to the right of Pueblo Marinero. And Manrique got heavily involved with the design of that. He did all the interiors and the gardens, and the hotel won awards for its unusual and innovative construction. And the third part of the original plan was to create some upmarket apartments. And again, Manrique was heavily involved in this. And the Apartamentos Los Molinos were built on the site of an original mill, hence the name. And it was a big apartment complex and it's beautifully designed. You know, if you go and visit it today, have a walk through, and you'll see how again, the design is very much like streets meandering through houses. There are communal swimming pools there, and you could certainly even now describe them as very upmarket apartment complexes. So work got going on creating the reality of the original vision with the five-star hotel, Pueblo Marinero and Los Molinos. And of course, like Puerto del Carmen, the long-term plan was to fill in all the bits in between with commercial centres like Centro Comercial Las Maretas and Las Cucharas and so on, where there would be shops, bars and restaurants. So in 1977, the Meliá Salinas opened and Costa Teguise was up and running as an upmarket resort. And the original vision inspired King Hussein of Jordan so much that he actually had a house built at the other end of the resort. And he ultimately gave it to the King of Spain, and we all still call it the King's House in Costa Teguise, complete with helicopter pad and lots of security apparatus around it. The marketing of the Meliá Salinas Hotel was given over initially to Sheraton Hotels because they had a client base that it was felt would be interested in travelling to a five-star accommodation in the Canary Islands. So what happened? Well, it was lackluster, and I think the issue Costa Teguise in particular, but Lanzarote in general at that time, just wasn't worthy of five-star type customers. We didn't have the infrastructure, we didn't have the transport system, we didn't have the quality of hire cars, all the roads that they would travel on that people who want to stay in luxury five-star accommodation wanted. So really through the late 70s and early 80s, the occupancy in the hotel and the other hotels, the other four-star hotels that were being built, and the apartments like Los Molinos was pretty mediocre. And that started to have a negative effect on attracting new businesses, new shops, bars and restaurants to come into the new resort and actually start offering something different. So by the early 80s, Costa Teguise, frankly, was struggling. Now, believe it or not, what saved the resort was timeshare. And it was during this period, timeshare across the Canaries became a really big thing. And the timeshare companies identified Costa Teguise as a likely place that they could build new resorts and sell them using the timeshare sales technique, selling weeks or fortnights to families who would use them for years and years to come. The biggest of them all was at that time it was called the Lanzarote Beach Club. It's now called Sands Beach Resort, and that was originally a massive timeshare resort, although a lot of the properties there, if not all of the properties there, have now been taken into private ownership. And it was timeshare that really revitalised Costa Teguise, because the way the timeshare companies worked was that they marketed very heavily in Northern Europe, but mainly in the United Kingdom, to bring people over on very inexpensive packages to come and stay in these timeshare resorts and then spend a lot of time trying to sell them timeshare weeks. And their marketing machines were hugely successful. So suddenly you were having weekly influx of new people coming to Costa Teguise, some of whom ended up buying timeshare weeks, but all of whom were being exposed to the delights of this new resort in Lanzarote, to the fantastic weather we have and all the other things. And, you know, many of them never bought timeshare, but they just started becoming regular visitors to the island because they fell in love with Costa Teguise. So while Puerto del Carmen at that time was predominantly German and Scandinavian tourists, Costa Teguise through the 80s and into the 90s became very much the British resort, and the vast majority of people visiting there were coming from the United Kingdom. But there was also another group of people that were being attracted to Costa Teguise, and they were the windsurfers. And Costa Teguise, if you look on a map of Lanzarote, kind of sticks out a little bit from the island. And it means just offshore there are generally really good winds during the trade wind season. And Costa Teguise became an absolute mecca for windsurfers and kite surfers. And through the late 80s and 90s, right up to the present day, there was a substantial group of people coming to the island to enjoy that sport and that hobby. So from a period of sort of relative mediocrity and not a great deal of success as a five-star resort, by the late 80s and early 90s, Costa Teguise was flying. There were lots of bars and restaurants that had opened up to take advantage of all these customers coming over, the windsurfers and the timeshare people, and it was thriving. It was doing really, really well. And this sparked off an absolutely massive construction boom in the resort. And unfortunately, many of the constructions that were started in the early 90s were never completed. And they all have different reasons. I mean, some of them went bust, others didn't have the proper permissions to do the job, and yet some idiot let them start work on it. And it left a bit of a mess in certain areas of the resort, and we still have the legacy of that today. Where we've got these skeleton buildings which look very tatty, and they're all waiting for a court to allow the Ayuntamiento or order the Ayuntamiento to pull them down and clean up the resort. So we now move into the third and current phase of Costa Teguise, which really began in the early 2000s. So by this time, the timeshare is starting to fall away. Too many people have been burned by timeshare. A lot of people lost money at the Lanzarote Beach Club when they were sold the dream of the next phase, which was never built. And there were court cases going on around that with various people. I should say that some of the original timeshare resorts are still functioning as timeshare resorts, and the people have had really good value out of it. But there was also a lot of bad publicity about timeshare in this period and the kind of people who were involved in it. So that was a market that was gradually falling away. And at this time, the Ayuntamiento decided that it would be, the tourism side was pretty much looked after because enough people had come in during that timeshare period that they were coming back and enjoying their holidays in, you know, the nice compact centre of Costa Teguise, and the fact that the resort is relatively flat all the way through and has some superb beaches on it. So tourism was doing okay. The question the Ayuntamiento were asking themselves was, you know, what do we do next to kind of expand this resort? And they hit upon the idea of making it a kind of dormitory town for Arrecife. And if you go back to the early 2000s, Arrecife then, as it is today, has the highest number of people on the island living in it, but it's also a commercial centre, so lots and lots of people work there. Now, most people are living in apartments. Couples that get together were living in apartments, and they wanted to expand to bigger properties as their families were growing. And the Ayuntamiento then allowed building permission on really big swathes of land. You'll see these right at the entrance to Costa Teguise, and there's the big Teguise Greens development off to your left. Towards the centre of town, there was the Los Grupitos development, which again, these were kind of more upmarket apartments, duplexes, and some individual villas that were built. And a lot of people who were living in Arrecife at that time bought those properties and moved into them to get themselves out of the main town, and they just commuted each day into Arrecife. And it does mark out Costa Teguise today as somewhat different to the other two resorts on the island, in that there is a sizable Canarian population, local population, living in the resort and spending their time there. Certainly much more so than in Puerto del Carmen and Playa Blanca. Now, this increase in the locals population in Costa Teguise has had what I think is a really positive effect on the resort, because whilst there are still the what I would call tourist places there, so there are lots of British bars, Irish bars, karaoke bars, bars that do bingo and all that kind of stuff, there are also a lot of bars and restaurants that have sprung up that are kind of aimed more at the locals market. So there are places that do really good tapas there. There is the most fabulous rice restaurant that does a really authentic Valencian paella. There are pinchos bars. There are just lots of places aimed at the local residents who are living in Costa Teguise and perhaps working in Arrecife. And of course, those bars and restaurants are not exclusively for the local Canarian restaurants. So there's a really nice crossover that you see, and you'll see local Canarians, having a pint of Guinness in an Irish bar, and you'll see tourists enjoying a pincho and a caña in one of the pincho bars. But it does just mean there's more variety gastronomically in Costa Teguise, I would say, certainly than Puerto del Carmen. So that brings us to today, and Costa Teguise is the resort we know and love, which I think is a really interesting mishmash of Canarian residents, tourists mainly from the UK. In the summer months you get lots of couples, in the summer months you get lots of families. In the winter months you tend to get the couples and swallows. Other complexes like Playa Bastian, which is a very big one, have grown up over the years, and the resort just works really, really well, and it kind of like Puerto del Carmen in that it provides that mixture of 5-star, 4-star, cheap and cheerful, and everything in between, and lots of very nice big villas now towards the back of the resort as well. So that's the Costa Teguise story. I hope you found that interesting. You certainly seem to enjoy the one we did on Puerto del Carmen. I've had a few people asking me for our story and how we ended up living in Lanzarote and why. I don't really think it's worthy of a video because I prefer the videos to be about Lanzarote rather than about me. But if you are interested, I wrote a book many years ago now actually, but charting the reasons we moved to the island and what our first few years were like here. It is still available on sale as a paperback or on Amazon Kindle, but as a viewer of the YouTube channel, I'm more than happy to let you have a free copy of that. So I've turned it into a PDF. You'll see a link below that if you just put in your name and email address, I will just email you a copy of the PDF and you can read it if you're interested to find out our story and how we ended up in Lanzarote. So I promised to do another one of these on Playa Blanca, and I will do so as promised. Is there anything else you'd like me to cover about the island? I mean, I'm not short of ideas, but maybe there are things I haven't thought of. Just put a comment in below and let me know what you'd like to know about, what you'd like to hear about in relation to Lanzarote. I feel very lucky to have made it my home for pretty much half my life now. And I absolutely love sharing these stories with you. Thanks so much for watching. Do come back again. We do one of these every Tuesday. We do a walkabout video every Thursday. And on Saturday, I do the Lanzarote news. So if you're not already subscribed to the channel, just hit the subscribe button. And if you haven't liked this video yet, please do so. It really does help us. Bye for now, everyone. Bye.